Hello, I shall start by introducing myself. My name is Professor Philip Taylor. I work in the Department of Human Resource Management in the Business School. My full title is Professor of Work and Employment Studies, which gives you some indication of the areas of my research, my teaching, and my knowledge. I'm also Associate Dean International, which also gives you an indication of some of the interests that I have in terms of the university and developing its internationalisation agenda. Now, what I'm going to be talking about today are some of the international human resource management challenges in a very general sense that might emerge from this new global world of work in which we live. And I'm going to do this in a number of ways. First of all, I'm going to present to you briefly some of the key concepts or ways in which globalization has been considered in the academic literature and more widely. Secondly, I'm going to give you two scenarios. One, regarding the manufacture of Apple phones. Secondly, regarding the recruitment to the UK from abroad of people with software skills from India that indicate some of the more concrete, in a more concrete way, the challenges that emerge in terms of people management across the world. Thirdly, what I'm going to do is give you examples, concrete examples, of some of the HR challenges that emerge from the call center industry. The call center industry is something I've been studying for 20 years, and I'll look at some of the issues that arise out of the process of offshoring, the removal of contact center services from the UK and Scotland to India, the Philippines, and so on, and some of the human resource management challenges that might emerge, if you like, in this country, but also emerge in remote locations as well. So the contrasting HR challenges. So this is a very concrete illustration of some of the emerging issues. And finally, what I want to do today is reflect more generically upon some of the skills, aptitudes, and qualities that a reflective HR manager might require in this global world. So that will be quite a general reflection upon the issues and the challenges and the qualities and the capabilities that are required of you as potential managers for when you leave the university and face the reality of this new world of work. I want to begin, though, with talking about globalization, because if there ever was a word that was used or overused in the 1990s and the 2000s, it was that word globalization. It was used to describe all manner of phenomena: political, economic, cultural, social, all manner of different types of human activity. And it's true to say that it is a complex phenomena, and it is also one that has been regarded as globalization with different perspectives by the academic world and also by practitioners at governmental and policy level. And in short, there are three different ways in which globalization has been regarded. The first position, if you like, is that of what might be called the hyper-globalizers. Those who believe that the globalized state has already been arrived at, that we now live in a borderless world. We live in a world in which governments and states have very little control over external dynamic forces, primarily economic forces. We live in a world that is almost completely borderless in this sense, and that investment, technology, information, and knowledge pass seamlessly around the world, cascades around the world in an uninhibited manner. If this is true, then this has huge implications, does it not, for management, for labour, and so on. The second way of regarding globalization has been by those people who would regard themselves as skeptics. They argue that there is internationalisation taking place, but this is not qualitatively different from the internationalisation that's taken place in the world economy for many decades or many centuries. So their position is one which, again, if you've got implications that flow from this, mean that we're not talking about a substantially new period in which different skills, different capabilities, or different processes are required. The third position in the globalization debate is one that we can say that sees globalization not as an end state, not something like the hyper-globalists believe that has already been achieved. These people argue, like Peter Dicken and David Held and others, that the world is becoming increasingly interconnected. The global economy is becoming more enmeshed between developing and developing countries. And you could cite China as a fine example of an emerging country that has become increasingly integrated into the flows of manufacturing in this global economy. Now, this position, the position of those who believe that the world is becoming more interconnected, neither the skeptics nor the hyperglobalists, is probably the most convincing position to adopt both empirically and conceptually in terms of understanding the world. Now, why do I spend so much time with this preamble on globalization? It helps us understand, it gives us a framework for understanding that when we move to people management issues, HRM issues, the management of people at an international level, which is what this talk is most concerned, it gives us a framework for understanding these challenges, these tasks. The next level we need to go to is the level of the firm, is the level of the company, as it develops human resource management practices that can be effective in this greatly more interconnected world. So, what are the consequences of the strategies, the policies, and the practices of the international firm for human resource management and for employment relations? And here I just want to pick two examples that we could use to illustrate what some of the challenges might be in the new global world of work. The first one, imagine that you are a senior human resource manager working for Apple. You are on the verge of the development or the throwing onto the market of the new iPhone. That's just emerged. The demand for customers is huge, but at the moment, the supply of manufactured iPhones from factories in China is falling well behind demand. You need to get the phones onto the market. Now, of course, this is a massive logistical, production, management science, transport, a huge undertaking that requires the collaboration and the cooperation of many different types of productive force and different skills and different labour across a global servicing and manufacturing supply chain. And there are levels of complexity, because just taking it from the human resource management point of view, that the mobile phone that is produced, that the company wants to get to market to maximise massive profits, the manufacturing of these phones takes place in South China. The second element of complexity is that the manufacture of these phones is not undertaken by Apple itself, but is subcontracted to factories and a company that runs these factories called Foxconn, a third party. So it's not just about developing initiatives in your own company, it's about liaising and setting up structures of governance and control and communication with a third party. And think about what some of the human resource management issues might be involved in this. How do we hire the right number of people to ensure the manufacturing of these phones meets demand? How can we ensure that they have the right level of skills? Do the factories and the facilities have the capacity to absorb these people? And another thing that probably would not have been thought about. In China, most of these workers who come from the countryside and are young migrant workers come to live in the cities and the towns near where these factories are located have to live somewhere. Many of them, most of them, are accommodated in dormitory regimes. Are there sufficient dormitory regimes to accommodate these young workers when they come in? How long is the training period going to be? Is it possible just to move people onto the production line as soon as they arrive? Or there necessarily has to be a period of training. How quickly can it be before these people become productive? And so on and so on. And these sorts of challenges are happening many, many thousands of miles away. What are the relationships between the management of Apple Factory, human resource management, and the people management policies and practices of Foxconn on the ground? Is the labour market tight in these towns? In these cities? What wages needs to be paid to attract workers, to get new hires? And if you know anything about the situation in China at the moment, you will know that workers are beginning to demand better pay, better conditions, and so on and so forth. How does the human resource practices and management of Apple relate to these challenges that exist on the ground? And there are another series of consequences that haven't been possibly considered or might not be apparent but have to be dealt with. In China, in the Foxconn factories between 2010 and 2011, a large number of these young workers committed suicide. They threw themselves off the top of their factories or the dormitory labour regimes where they were working. These were suicides that were apparently caused by the working conditions that people were facing and the living conditions that they had in the dormitories. These workers were blaming the despair of these conditions for causing their deaths. Now, if you're coming from a human resource management point of view of the Apple factory, how do Apple managers deal with the ethical issues that arise from these sorts of practices? How is it possible for these risks to be minimized? Are workers in China to be given certain rights and better conditions to prevent the recurrence of these things happening? And from a corporate point of view, Apple will be attempting to try to minimize the reputational damage that comes from these practices. So merely unpicking this example of Apple and iPhones, reveals the complexity of management and HRM issues that might arise from what seems to be a fairly straightforward situation.